Hello, hello, my name is Emerine, and today we're going to be talking about printing. We're going to be talking about different kinds of paper, different kinds of finishes, and a whole bunch of fun things that you can add to your own books, your own projects. You can do it either by hand or through a producer or a publisher. And so this is going to be a lot of different options, definitely not everything. And it's going to be based off of my own research, my own experience of working with printers and making things on my own. And I'm also just pulling some interesting things from my collection to talk about that I've seen other people do. Now, to start off, what I would recommend is before you even start actually making your project, plan out all the things that you want and then look around at different printers or different publishers if you're going to be going through a company to see what their options are, and then even just what their limitations are if they have anything that they do specially. And then also, most of the time they'll give you a template for certain sizes or even certain dimensions of projects. So that's also extremely helpful so that you don't have to remake it after you've already done your project. Now, the first thing that you need to figure out is if you want your book, if you're going to be printing a book, to be hardback or paperback. Now, other than the difference of the cover being either a hardback like this or super bendable like this one, is how they feel in your hand or the impression that they give. Kind of like how a paperback is a little bit more casual. It's going to also be cheaper. It's also not going to last as long. But then a hardback, it looks a little bit nicer, it seems a little bit more prestigious, and it will also last longer and protect the pages inside. Speaking of the paper inside, you also will have to figure out if you want the inside pages to be all black and white or full color. Even if you want to print everything inside in another color other than black, usually you will be charged for full color, and full color is more expensive, but there's a lot more options than if you just do black and white. The next thing that you're going to see is coated versus uncoated paper. And so basically uncoated is just paper by itself with no special treatment to it, and then coated paper has a coating on it. But what that looks like is that uncoated paper will absorb the ink a lot more, so your colors are not going to be as vibrant, and also your lines are not going to be as smooth or as crisp. And then also your colors are going to be a bit more desaturated, and so your blacks aren't going to be black, and then you'll also see more of the texture of the paper. Meanwhile, coated paper is a little bit smoother, your lines will stay a little bit straighter, your colors will stay super vibrant, and also it lasts longer. And the general rule for the weight of the paper, basically the lower the number is going to be the thinner the paper is, and then a higher number is heavier paper. But just because something is thinner doesn't mean that it's less quality. That's usually the case, but depending on what printer you go to, they might just have high quality paper all around. But there is a major difference between getting cheap paper versus quality or longer lasting paper, and that is this: it will yellow over time. Both of these books are less than 10 years old, and actually the one that's more yellowed is only 2 years newer than the one that's all white. And what's the difference? It's the type of paper. And as we are moving from the inside to the cover, we can go and see the inside cover. So even on paperback books, you can still print on the inside, on the front and the back. And then with hardback books, this is called the end sheet or the flyleaf. But you can also have like a pattern, or it can also just be a solid piece of paper. Now we're going to talk about bindings, or how books are bound. Now the most common one is called a perfect bind. Most paperback books are bound in this way. Basically, you will have your groups of paper called blocks, and they're glued together just on the edge. And this can be in really, really skinny books or in really thick books like this one. The next is called a saddle stitch. And so usually this is what you see with like magazines or even comic books. And usually it's put together with staples, but sometimes it can even be sewn together with thread. The next is called a coil, and so this is usually made out of plastic, and you might not want to use this for a higher end project, but it is really common with like reports and things, or if you just want to give something a certain look. And this is actually really common to find at like print it yourself places like Staples or FedEx. The next is a spiral, and so spirals, you can usually find them on like notebooks or journals. But again, if you are trying to go for a certain aesthetic, or if you want your book to look like a notebook or something, that's one way to give it just an extra level of realism. And so now this next one is kind of in between a coil and a spiral, and it's called wire O. It might be called something different depending on where you're getting something printed or published. But basically it is just another sturdy way to keep all of your pages together. And now real quick before we go on to the cover, let's talk about folds. And so you can have different fun folds on the inside, whether that be to show poster or to just have it be more interesting. And so this first one is an accordion fold. That's where it goes back and forth like an accordion. And one of the pros of this is that you can put artwork or words or whatever you want on both sides, and then because of the fold it's naturally segmented, so you can choose where you want things to start and stop if you want it to go over multiple panels, etc. The next is a trifold. It's pretty simple. You just fold it into 3. Usually this is done with a lot of brochures as well, but there's really no reason not to include this in a project, since it can also naturally segment out different areas without having to make like shapes or lines or things. And then this last one I'm naming miscellaneous because you can fold paper however you want. There's so many different folding techniques. Even if you want to include origami or whatever you want, you can do any type of folding. And so for this one, there's a lot of partial accordion, but then also like there's pockets folded into here, and so it just really depends on what you want to do. There's so many creative ideas out there, so even if you just look around, then you can find a lot of interesting ways to create a place to put your story or your images. And last but not least is the French flap. So there's 2 different ways that it's usually done. There is the free French flap, like it is here, where it's not glued down or anything, it's just an extension of the cover folded over so that the edge is really nice, and it also gives that 2 layers for protection. But then here we see that they actually elongated it more so that you wouldn't notice it as much, and it's glued down. And I believe that they did this in particular because the paper that they used is a lot thinner than in the first example. And so they were just able to double it up and also use glue to reinforce the cover. All right, and now we're getting into the covers, which is the fun part because that's the part that most people see. So the first one that we're looking at is glossy. And so a lot of books use the glossy cover. It looks really nice. It makes colors look vibrant, and it can catch people's eye because of that natural shine that's happening. The next is matte. This basically means that there's not going to be an extra coating put on top of the paper to make it glossy. And this can have little to no reflection at all. And then also it can look a little bit nicer in the sense of it doesn't look as plasticky. Next is what I like to call a soft matte. So this also has little to no reflection whatsoever. And it's really hard to tell on video, but in person, the matte versus soft matte feels very different. The soft matte feels almost buttery and soft, and it's really, really smooth. And up next are different kind of matte paper finishes. And so depending on how hot or cold the press is, will determine how much texture is on the paper. So on this first one, I can tell that it is more of a hot press. You can even think of like when ironing clothes. There is less texture, but it's still matte. And then next is probably closer to a cold press. There's a little bit more tooth to the paper, a little bit more texture. Depending on how textured you want your paper cover to be, then you can look at things of hot press versus cold press. And then next is leather. So real leather is very expensive, but even faux leather can elevate something to look really, really nice. And although I personally think it looks best on hardback, you can also find this in like paperback, like in journals or different things like that too. And also leather looks really good when things are embossed in it. It just looks really fancy and really elevated without having to do a ton of fancy things. Next up is a cloth cover. And so this is basically just using either a cotton or some kind of blend to cover the book. And this is still done today. A lot of the Penguin Classics use this. A lot of book binding kits will use these cloth covers. And also a lot of old books also use this like cloth way to cover hardback books, and so it's really durable, it looks really nice, and you can even do a combo with using the cloth spine but then pairing it with a paper, or you can even do a like leather cover. And so this just gives that little extra detail and also helps to reinforce the spine. And another thing that you can look out for when researching printers is if they have any metallic finishes. And so although it's a little subtle on video, the teal blue from Spy Family and then just the entire cover in general for She and Her Cat, they are both very shiny in a different way that's not just a glossy cover. And so this is something that you can talk with your printers about, it being printed on specialty paper like metallic paper. And so that would be a special ask to your printers unless they just have that as an option. And up next are jackets. And so jackets are basically just a long piece of paper that gets folded over the cover of a book. Usually hardcover, but you can also see this with paperback books as well. This just helps to protect the book, it helps to give another layer of defense, and it also even gives more area for you to put something special about your book. So most of these jackets will just have printing on the outside, but there are some books that I have found where they have even printing on the inside, whether it be extra art or whether it even be a whole separate cover that you can choose from. And usually these are just made out of paper, but you can also have this done in acrylic if you want to do something that's clear or transparent or even a certain color on top. And there's also partial jackets where it's the same shape as the full book jacket, but it's just shorter. And so this can be done for a couple of different reasons. It can be to add like promotional advertisement, it can be to add just more information about the book or whatever it is. And then here we have an example where the main cover is a glossy paperback, but then you put on the jacket cover and then they added the title, and then you put in this partial jacket on the bottom and they have this extra information. Up next are slip cases, and so this is basically just a place to house either a single book or even a whole bunch of pieces together. The main thing is that it has a back, so you can only take things out of it in one way. And even these little box sets, they're basically just giant slip cases. And now the difference between a slip case and a sleeve is that a sleeve, you can take whatever is inside, you can take it out from both sides. The sleeve just wraps around maybe the top, bottom, and front and back, but leaves out the sides. Or it can also leave out the top and the bottom, but basically you can take it out in two different ways. And in the same way with the jacket, usually the sleeves are just paper, but you can also find them in this acrylic or in this plastic, and it can be totally clear. It can have a fun little effect like this one with twice, or it can even be a full color and also have printing on it. And then if you really want to protect whatever you're working on, then you can also use a box. So there's a lot of different types of boxes out there. So definitely do your research. Make sure that you find patterns, you do mock-ups, and you make sure that all of your measurements are correct and that things will fit. But this is probably the most common box. It's called a telescope box. This is the one where it's very flush and it just kind of keeps itself together. But then there's also this kind where the lid pops up. They're called self-erecting, but this is using a magnet closure instead of having it tuck in like most boxes that we interact with day to day do. And now that we've gotten all of the structural stuff out of the way, let's talk about the fun details. And so these will definitely depend on what your producer or the printer has available to them, or even the tools that you have available to yourself, but there's so many different ideas. And so the first one is die cuts, or they're also called cutouts. It can be something that is pretty simple like this, where it's just some holes. This one also is revealing the color underneath, so it can be a fun little like secret element. I didn't even know that this was a cutout until I was messing around with the book jacket one day. And although it is easier to do die cuts from things that are like paperback, it is also possible to do things in hardback or in the thicker materials as well. And embossing can go basically one or two ways. It can raise up text, like here. You can see on the back that the text was pushed outwards, and so it is raised on top. But then here we see that is actually embossed pushing down, and so it still gives that raised effect, but they just put it through whatever stamping machine they were using in a different way. And as a little bonus, on this book, it might look and feel like it's embossed, but on the other side, it's totally flat. So how are they doing this? It's actually a spot gloss. And so spot gloss is just like what it sounds like, adding a thicker glossy layer to only certain spots or only certain places on your piece of paper. And so this can be done to help contrast between matte and glossy. It can also help to make something maybe look metallic or holographic without having to pay that extra price for those specialty materials, when you can just use a color underneath and then just make it glossy. You can also do spot texturing. And so here, since the drawing is kind of like chunky or gritty, instead of making them smooth and shiny, they made it textured and kind of gritty to help emphasize even the texture of the drawing. And up next is a fun one. And so there are foils, or called holographic foils. And so this can be applied over a large area like this, or it can even be put in smaller areas. Now, depending on what this foil is being applied to on top, or if it's a holographic paper, or if you're adding a gloss on top of it, this can all change what it looks like. And there's not just this smooth, like holographic rainbow texture. You can also find ones where they have different shapes, different colors, even like this one where it looks really chunky. And so you can find a lot of these different holographic transparent foils online. You can find them in bigger sheets, you can find them for nail art. They are everywhere. And so normally printers have CMYK, which stands for cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. And so if there's any other color that cannot be made by mixing those four together, then that has to be specially made. That's what even a lot of Pantones or a lot of those trademarked colors are, a special formulation. And so those have to be made separately and also added to the printer separately. And so metallic fifth colors can help with like branding and consistency, but it is expensive. But thankfully some of these metallics are a little bit easier because they just have to put in silver or gold, or even all of these fun other colors, so that you can have this like shiny chrome added to your project. And just because you add a metallic color to your printing, it doesn't mean that it's going to react the same. Depending on the texture of the paper underneath and depending on how you are treating the top, whether it's glossy or matte, if it's rough or if it's smooth, it's going to change how the metallic ink will even appear. And going back to inside the book, you can also do insert pages. And so the main blocks of your book will probably only be one paper type or even one printing color, but these insert pages can be added individually. Now, it is a little bit more expensive to add them individually, but especially if you're doing a perfect bind, it's a little bit easier. And so you can do this by adding in color pages to the beginning of your black and white story, or you can add specialty paper like this printed onion paper to the beginning of your book. Another fun thing that you can add is sprayed edges. Now, I know a lot of people have been doing custom sprayed edges, and there are producers who will do it for you as well. So it doesn't have to be metallic like this one, but you can also do in different colors or even in different designs. And now, last but not least, let's talk about some accessories or some fun extra things that you can add to your projects. Now, one of them is a bookmark ribbon. This is pretty common, and you can have it be different colors. You can add little logos or designs to it. And although I see it mostly in hardback books, but you can also find them in paperback or in journals or different things like that. You can also add bags. For example, these two that I have, they used bags to make it look more like food or to look like cereal. And depending on if you use a metallic versus a clear, if you use a really crunchy versus a really soft bag, then you can add even an extra layer to the experience. And usually this is seen in older toys, but you can do something using a blister bubble and a card back. And so because usually older toys used this, you can go along with that theme, or if you want to include something special, or if you want to include a little extra accessory, then you can use this. And I didn't know what this was called before, but now I definitely am going to be looking up places that do custom blister bubbles. Another even easier thing that you can add so that you can have little additional goodies in your project are pockets. And then I also wanted to put this one in here of adding locks, or you can add different closures or different things. And if you like how I added this little ribbon to keep my keys connected to the album, you can also even check my TikTok. If you love this video, then you will love my TikTok. I talk all about design and printing and manga, and it has a whole bunch of shelving ASMR for you. And before I sign off for today, something that I would recommend is that wherever you are printing, even if you've printed through them before, ask if they can send you a proof copy, or even just ordering one to see what the quality is like, to see if the text is the size that you want, that the colors are the way that you want, and even if they have mistakes. I've had printing errors before, and thankfully the customer service has been really nice and understanding. But even professional, even big companies can still have misprints. So you just want to double check before you start ordering dozens or even hundreds or thousands of copies of whatever you're working on. And with all that info, I hope that it was helpful. If you guys saw anything that maybe you've never seen before, let me know in the comments. Or if there's something that you are trying to find or that you were able to find a specialty producer for, also let me know. I'm always looking for different ways to make projects more interesting, and I have a couple of projects in the works too, so that's going to be coming up. But with all that being said, I hope that you have a lovely rest of your day and that this was helpful. Have a great one.